The casserole was still steaming when Colleen reached across the table, closed her flour-dusted hand over mine, and asked when Daniel and I were finally getting married. Not if. When, she said it the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt, light, certain, already expecting the answer. And then, when I froze with my fork halfway up and my mouth open on nothing, she leaned in, her eyes bright and a little wet, and she smiled and said it again. Well, when? Daniel choked on his water. I felt my whole face go hot. We had been best friends for 11 years, since a rainy September when he loaned me an umbrella at the bus stop and I never gave it back, and in all that time neither of us had ever said the word marriage out loud, not once, not even as a joke. And now his mother was holding my hand across a table she had set for 3, in a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and rain. Waiting, Mom, Daniel said. We're not. It isn't like that. Isn't it? Colleen said. It wasn't a question. I laughed, because that's what you do. I said something about how we were just friends, how she'd known that for a decade, how she was being ridiculous, and I squeezed her hand and told her the casserole was perfect. She let me have that. She patted my knuckles and sat back and said, Fine, fine, an old woman can dream. And I would have believed it was nothing. One of those things people her age say, except that when she reached for the water pitcher, her hand shook so hard the ice rattled, and she set it back down without pouring. And for half a second something crossed her face that had nothing to do with dreaming. I saw it. I filed it away. And I made the biggest mistake of that whole year, which was assuming I had time to ask her about it later. On the drive home, Daniel kept glancing at me at every red light. She's just getting sentimental, he said. Ignore her. Yeah, I said, watching the wipers drag across the glass. Sentimental, but I was thinking about her hand on the pitcher. And I was thinking about the 3 orange pill bottles I'd seen lined up on the windowsill above her sink, turned so the labels faced the wall, the way you turn a photograph of someone you're not ready to look at yet. I went back to the Bluebird 2 days later, alone, because I couldn't stop thinking about the pill bottles. The Bluebird was Colleen's calf, a narrow brick storefront on Marsh Street that she'd run for 31 years, the kind of place where the regulars had assigned stools and the pie rotated by the season. She'd practically raised me in that calf. My own mother worked doubles when I was a kid, and Colleen used to sit me at the end of the counter with a coloring book and a warm cinnamon roll and tell me I was the best-behaved customer she had. I learned to read at that counter. I learned what a family sounded like at that counter. So when I walked in that Tuesday and found her sitting alone in the back booth at 2 in the afternoon with the closed sign flipped and her head in her hands, my stomach dropped straight through the floor. She looked up. She'd been crying. Colleen Voss did not cry. Sit down, sweetheart, she said. I sat. She told me she'd known for 4 months. Pancreatic, she told me the number of months the doctors had given her the way you'd read a weather forecast. Flat, resigned, already past the point of arguing. She'd told no one. Not Daniel, not her sister, not the regulars who still thought she was slowing down because of her knees. Colleen, my voice came out wrong. Daniel has to know. You have to tell him. I will. I will. She wrapped both her hands around her coffee cup, though the coffee had gone cold hours ago. But not yet. Because the second I tell that boy, he stops living his life and starts sitting by my bed watching me die, and I won't have it. I won't have his last months of freedom spent on me. She looked at me then, and the brightness came back into her eyes, but it was fierce this time, not sweet. That question I asked you Sunday, you thought it was a joke. I thought, I'm not asking as a joke, Nora. I'm asking as a woman running out of time. She reached across and gripped my wrist, and her grip was still strong, stronger than her shaking hands had any right to be. I need to know he won't be alone. That's all I want. That's the whole thing. I need to know that when I'm gone, somebody in this world loves my son enough to stay. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? That I did? That I had, maybe, for years, in a locked and quiet way I never let myself open? I sat there in the back booth of the calf that raised me, and I held her hand, and I said nothing at all. And she watched me not say it. And she nodded slowly, like I'd answered anyway. "There's one more thing," she said. "And this part you're not going to like." She glanced at the front window, where the rain had started up again, streaking the glass gray. "It's about Marcus." I knew the name. I'd met him twice, both times briefly. Both times with the vague sense afterward of having shaken hands with something cold. Marcus Kessler was Colleen's stepson, the child of her second husband, Ray, who died 6 years back. Ray had come into Colleen's life late and left it early, and he'd brought with him one grown son from before. Marcus, a real estate attorney 2 towns over, all pressed collars and even teeth. He'd never wanted anything to do with Colleen while Ray was alive. He surfaced only for the funeral, where he'd stood at the back in a suit that cost more than the casket and left before the reception. When Ray passed, Colleen said, everything got folded into a trust. The building, the house on Alder, the calf, the ovens, the recipes, all of it. Ray set it up years ago, and he named a trustee because that's what his lawyer told him to do. She swallowed. The trustee is Marcus. He controls it. He controls all of it. Legally, on paper, until I die, I'm just the, what did he call me, the life beneficiary. I get to live in the house and run the calf. But I can't sell it, I can't change it, I can't leave it to Daniel without Marcus signing off. And when I go, the whole trust passes according to the terms Ray signed. And the terms Ray signed, God rest him, God forgive him, he never read close enough. Her voice cracked. The terms say that if I die and Daniel isn't married, Marcus, as trustee, has discretion. Discretion to distribute, discretion to sell, discretion to do whatever a man like that decides is prudent. The rain hit the window harder. A car hissed past on Marsh Street. So the marriage thing, I said slowly. Sunday, that wasn't only about you being scared for Daniel. No, she met my eyes. It's about a clause. If Daniel's married when I go, the trust reads different. There's a protection in it for a spouse and a household. Ray put it in thinking of me and never imagining Daniel would need it. She laughed, a small broken sound. My husband accidentally left my son one narrow door, Nora, and it only opens if there's a wife standing in it. I want to tell you I stayed calm. I didn't. Something in my chest had gone very still and very loud at the same time, the way a house goes quiet right before the wind hits it. How long? I asked. The doctors. How long? And Colleen Voss, who had never once in my life lied to me, looked at her cold coffee and said, not long enough to wait for you two to figure it out on your own. Marcus reached into our lives before he ever walked back into them. It started with a text to Colleen's phone the next morning. I was there when it buzzed, helping her count the register. A message from M. Kessler that read, with no greeting, need to discuss trust administration. Property values are peaking. We'd be foolish not to act. Call me. Then, an hour later, an email, which she turned the screen to show me. 3 paragraphs of soft, lawyerly language about responsible stewardship and maximizing the estate for all parties. And, buried in the middle, where you'd almost miss it, a single sentence noting that he had taken the preliminary step of engaging the Halstead Group to assess the Marsh Street parcel. The Halstead Group, I said. Developers. Colleen's mouth was a thin line. They put up those gray boxes out by the highway. The ones with the gym nobody uses. The calf. He was going to sell the calf. He came in person on Thursday. I'll give him this. He was good. He walked into the Bluebird in the middle of the afternoon rush, and he stood in the doorway in his good coat and looked around at 30 years of Colleen's life. The chipped blue counter, the photographs of Little League teams she'd sponsored, the pie case, and he smiled like a man appraising a lot. He kissed Colleen's cheek. He shook Daniel's hand and called him little brother, which made Daniel flinch. And when he got to me, he held my hand a beat too long and said, "You're the friend." Nora, Colleen talks about you like you're already family, and there was a blade inside the sentence so thin you could have missed it if you weren't already bleeding. He sat. He ordered coffee he didn't drink. And then, gently, reasonably, in front of everyone, he laid it out. The market was hot. The building was worth more than it had ever been worth or ever would be again. Colleen was, he was so sorry to say, not getting any younger, and the responsible thing, the loving thing, was to convert this beautiful but frankly declining asset into something that would take care of the family for a generation. He had a showing scheduled. Saturday, the Halstead people wanted to walk the parcel. This Saturday? Daniel said. 3 days from now? The market doesn't wait, little brother. Marcus stood, buttoned his coat, and neither, unfortunately, does the calendar. He set a card on the counter next to Colleen's hand. The paperwork closes end of the month. I'd love for this to be smooth. For everyone. He left. The bell over the door rang behind him. And for a second, nobody in the Bluebird moved, and the only sound was the rain and the hiss of the espresso machine, and then Colleen picked up his card, tore it neatly in half, and dropped it in the bus tub. "Well," she said, to the whole calf, "he can have the building. He'll never get the recipe." The regulars laughed. Daniel didn't. He was looking at his mother's shaking hands, and I could see the first real question forming behind his eyes. The why is she so frightened over a calf question? And I knew we were running out of days to keep him from the answer. Marcus stopped being polite on Friday. I got to the calf at 6 to help with the morning bake, and found a man in a windbreaker changing the lock on the back storeroom door. The storeroom where Colleen kept the deep freezers, the flour, 30 years of dry goods. He had a work order. The work order was signed by the trustee. "Securing the asset ahead of showing," he said, not unkindly, and he wouldn't give me a key. Colleen came out the back in her apron and stood in the rain looking at the new brass lock on her own storeroom, and something went out of her then. Not her fight. Her breath. She sagged against the doorframe, and I caught her, and she was so much lighter than she should have been, and I realized with a cold horror how much of her the last 4 months had already taken, while she hid it under a good coat and a straight back. We got her inside. We sat her down. And Daniel had come in behind me and seen all of it, the lock, his mother folding, my arms around her. Daniel knelt in front of her and said, "Mom, what is wrong with you? And don't tell me it's your knees," she told him. I stepped back and let her. It's not my story to give you word for word, a mother telling her son she's dying in the back of the calf where she raised him. But I'll tell you, Daniel didn't make a sound the whole time. He just held her hands and got smaller and smaller. And when she finished, he pressed his forehead to her knuckles and stayed there a long time. And when he finally looked up, his face had changed into something I'd never seen on him. Grief and rage fused into one flat, terrible calm. 4 months, he said. You've been carrying this 4 months. Alone, not alone. She looked at me. Nora knew. Since Tuesday. And Daniel turned and looked at me, and I braced for the betrayal to land, for him to ask how I could keep this from him. But it didn't come. Instead, his eyes filled, and he said, quietly, "Wrecked, thank you. For not letting her carry it by herself, even for a day." Behind us, on the counter, Colleen's phone buzzed. A text. From M. Kessler, confirming Saturday 10 a.m. walkthrough. "Please have the premises accessible. I'll be filing the sale motion with the court first thing Monday to keep us on schedule." Monday. He was filing Monday. Whatever we were going to do, we had the weekend, and not 1 hour more. Daniel stood up. The terrible calm settled over him fully. "Okay," he said. "Then we've got until Monday. Nora." He looked at me, and for the first time in 11 years there was something underneath the way he said my name that I didn't have a word for yet. "Help me tear this place apart. If there's a way to stop him. My mother spent 30 years leaving it somewhere in this building. I know her. She'd have left away." We found it Saturday night, in the recipe box. We'd searched everything by then. The office files, the safe behind the pie case that held nothing but a spare set of keys and Ray's old watch, the boxes in the house on Alder. Marcus's walkthrough that morning had been its own quiet horror. He'd let himself in at 10 with 2 men from the Halstead Group, both in fleece vests with tablets, and he'd toured them through 30 years of Colleen's life like a docent in a building already condemned. He rapped his knuckles on the blue counter and said the millwork was salvage at best. He gestured at the wall of Little League photos and said, "Obviously, all of this comes out." One of the Halstead men asked whether the ovens conveyed, and Marcus said. Without even glancing at the 80-year-old brick hearth Colleen had rebuilt with her own hands the year Daniel was born, scrap, buyers tearing to the studs. Colleen sat in the back booth with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing the entire time, and that silence frightened me more than any amount of shouting would have. I watched her watch a stranger measure her whole life in dollars per square foot, and I watched her decide not to give him the satisfaction of a single tear. But Daniel didn't have her restraint. When Marcus told the Halstead men the calf did marginal volume for the footprint, Daniel set down the tray he was carrying, walked the length of the counter, and stopped a foot from his stepbrother. "That hearth," Daniel said, quiet enough that the whole room leaned in to hear it, "has baked bread for this town every single morning for 31 years, through 2 recessions and a flood. It fed people who couldn't pay. It's done more good before 9 a.m. than you've done in your entire life." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Measure it all you want, Marcus. You still don't know what anything in here is worth." Marcus smiled his even smile and made a note on his tablet and said, "Sentiment doesn't appraise, little brother." But the Halstead men had gone quiet, and one of them wouldn't meet Colleen's eyes on the way out. And I filed that away too. The first hairline crack in Marcus's clean machine. The recipe box was tin, painted with faded bluebirds, the same box that had sat on the calf's back shelf my entire life. Colleen made me get it down. She said she wanted to give me her cinnamon roll recipe before. She didn't finish the sentence. And when I lifted the stack of oil-stained index cards to find it, there was a folded envelope taped to the bottom of the tin, and on the envelope, in Colleen's slanted hand, it said, "For Daniel," in case I run out of time to say it out loud. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, handwritten, dated 8 weeks earlier, and witnessed, signed at the bottom by 2 names I recognized, Estelle and Ruth, 2 of the calf regulars, the ones with the assigned stools. It was a codicil. I'm not a lawyer, but I'd spent a frantic night reading everything I could, and I knew enough to know what I was holding. In her own hand, dated, witnessed, Colleen had written a change to the trust. It removed Marcus Kessler as trustee for cause, being self-dealing and bad faith. It named Daniel as successor trustee. And it directed that the Marsh Street property and the Alder house pass to Daniel outright, and to any spouse of his, that the household be protected as my husband intended. Any spouse of his. Daniel read it 3 times. Then he set it down on the counter very carefully, like it might go off. She wrote him out, he said, in her own hand. With witnesses, I said. 2 of them. Dated. Is that, can she even, I don't know, I didn't. It's handwritten. That might make it a holographic codicil, which might be valid. Or it might get challenged, or, I don't know, Daniel. We need a real lawyer, and we have until Monday morning. My hands were shaking now, too. But this is a weapon. This is the first real weapon we've had. He doesn't know it exists. From the back booth, Colleen spoke, and her voice was tired, but there was a thread of the old iron in it. He knows something exists, she said. Why do you think he's in such a hurry? He can't find it. He's been through the house twice when he thought I was at the doctor. He's racing me to the finish line, and he thinks if he closes the sale before anyone produces it, possession does the rest. She smiled, thin and grim. I hid it in the one place a man like Marcus would never look. Under the recipes. He doesn't think there's anything valuable in a recipe box. She reached for my hand again. But you knew where to look, sweetheart, because you know what's valuable in this place. You always did. Sunday morning we tried to turn the paper into protection, and Sunday morning we learned how little a weapon is worth if you can't get anyone to help you fire it. Because it was a Sunday. Every probate attorney in the county was a voicemail. The courthouse was dark. And the one thing I understood clearly from my frantic night of reading was that a handwritten codicil doesn't stop anything on its own. It has to be entered, filed with the court. Or it's just a nice letter in a tin box while Marcus's typed, notarized, lawyer-blessed sale motion goes in first thing Monday and starts a machine that grinds for years. We had the truth. Marcus had the calendar. And on a Sunday, the calendar was winning. Daniel called 8 attorneys. 7 didn't pick up. The 8th, an old family lawman who golfed with the mayor, listened for 2 minutes and then said gently that going up against a licensed trustee on an emergency basis over a holographic document was a very tall order for a Monday, and that he'd hate to see them throw good money after a long shot, and Daniel hung up and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and said nothing for a while. Then, at 11, Estelle called the CAF phone. There was a sign. On the CAF. A Halstead Group sign, staked into the strip of grass by the front door sometime in the night, coming soon, and a rendering of a gray glass box where the Bluebird had stood for 31 years, and a phone number for leasing inquiries. Marcus hadn't waited for the sale to close. He was advertising the corpse before the patient was cold, and he'd done it on a Sunday specifically because he knew no office was open to stop him. Daniel and I stood in the rain looking at the sign, at the little rendering of the thing that was supposed to replace everything, and I watched him reach the edge of despair and then step back from it. He wants us to feel like it's already done, Daniel said slowly. That's the whole play. Make it look inevitable so we give up before Monday. He pulled the sign out of the ground, roots of wet grass and all, and laid it face down in the bed of his truck. It's not done. She wrote him out. We just have to live long enough to prove it, all 3 of us. We didn't know yet that Marcus already knew we had the codicil. We didn't know he was about to make the call that would show us exactly how far he'd go. We just knew we had one document, one weekend, and a woman we loved with less time than any of it. Marcus found out we had it on Sunday. And that's when he stopped pretending to be reasonable and showed us what he actually was. I still don't know how he knew. Maybe Estelle mentioned witnessing something for Colleen to the wrong person. A small town leaks. But at 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't have saved. And when I answered, Marcus's voice came through smooth and cold and stripped of every warm thing he'd worn into the calf. "Nora Bell," he said. "The friend. Let me save us both some time." I put it on speaker. Daniel went still beside me. "I understand a document may have surfaced," Marcus said. "A handwritten one. Let me tell you how that goes, since you're not lawyers and I am. I can test it. I say a dying, medicated woman was manipulated by a girl who's been circling this family's assets since she was old enough to hold a crayon. I tie it up in probate for 2 years. The calf closes anyway. It can't run without funds I control. Daniel spends his inheritance on legal fees and loses. That's the road you're on." A pause. Or what?" I said. "Or you hand it to me. We sell clean. Everyone gets a check. And I forget the part where I found out you've been practicing law without a license and unduly influencing a vulnerable adult. Because I looked into you, Nora. I found the thing from your last job. The money that went missing before you left. It was never charged, was it? But it'd be a shame for it to come up again now, when you're standing so close to a lot of my family's money." The blood drained out of my face. The thing from my last job, a register that came up short. A manager who'd blamed the new girl. An accusation I'd never been able to fully clean off my name even after I quit. It was nothing. It was old, and it was nothing, and it was exactly the kind of nothing a man like Marcus could shape into a something. Daniel took the phone out of my hand. "Marcus," he said, "listen to me very carefully." His voice didn't shake. "You come near her again, her name, her record, any of it, and I will spend every dollar you're trying to steal, making sure everyone in 3 counties knows exactly what you are. Are we clear?" Marcus laughed, soft. "Sentiment isn't a signature, little brother," he said. "The trust doesn't care how much you love her." And he hung up. Daniel stood there holding the dead phone. Then he turned to me, and his jaw was tight, and he said the thing I think he'd been holding for 6 years. "I stayed quiet this whole time because of exactly that," he said. 6 years, Nora. Since Ray's funeral. That's when Marcus first found out That's when he first threatened to dig up dirt and bury anyone I got close to keep control of the family. And I believed him. So I kept everyone at arm's length. I kept you at arm's length. I told myself we were better as friends, that it was safer, that you were safer if I never. He stopped. His eyes were wet. I loved you the whole time, from the bus stop. And I let a man like that make me a coward for 6 years because I thought silence would protect you. The rain was coming down outside. It had been coming down for what felt like the whole story. "I'm done being quiet," Daniel said. "Whatever happens Monday, I needed you to know that before it does." Colleen collapsed that night. We were still at the house on Alder when it happened. She went to stand and simply folded, and the next hours were sirens and fluorescent lights and a hospital corridor that smelled like the end of things. The doctors used careful words. Daniel held her hand. I stood in the hall and did the only useful thing I could think to do, which was fight. Because here is what I understood. Standing in that corridor at 2 in the morning, Marcus had made a mistake on the phone. He'd been so busy threatening me that he'd told me his whole plan out loud. Sell clean. Everyone gets a check. Halstead Group. And a man that arrogant leaves a trail. because he never thinks he'll need to hide it. So I called the one regular who'd never left the caf even when it thinned out. Estelle's nephew, who worked at the county clerk's office and owed Colleen for 100 free lunches during a bad year. And by dawn I had two things. The first was the name of a probate attorney willing to look at a holographic codicil on an emergency basis. The second, and the one that changed everything, was a filing 3 weeks earlier, before Marcus had ever set foot back in the Bluebird pretending to weigh his options. He had already signed a preliminary purchase agreement with the Halstead Group. Already with a line in it, Estelle's nephew read it to me twice to be sure, providing Marcus a consulting fee payable on close. A kickback written down, dated before he'd stood in the caf telling us he was only just now, reluctantly, considering whether to sell. He hadn't been deliberating. He'd already sold it. He'd already been paid to sell it. Every reasonable word out of his mouth had been theater over a done deal, and now I had the deal in writing, time-stamped, with his signature and his fee. And there was one more thread. The probate attorney, a woman named Priya who'd taken my 6 a.m. call because Estelle's nephew had begged her, told me the codicil alone was a coin flip. But the codicil, plus proof the trustee was self-dealing, changed everything. A holographic codicil is a maybe, she said. A trustee with an undisclosed kickback is a removal. You're not asking the court to believe a dying woman. You're handing them a paper trail. So I built the trail. I laid it out on a hospital tray table at 4 a.m. In order, the purchase agreement dated 3 weeks before Marcus ever walked into the caf, the consulting fee clause with his signature, the physician's note confirming Colleen was lucid the day she wrote the codicil, the 2 witnesses, the recording, because Marcus, arrogant to the last, had never once assumed a phone might be capturing the threats he made so smoothly. By the time the sun came up gray through the rain, I had 3 identical folders. One for the court, one for the disciplinary board, one to keep, and a woman 2 floors up who had taught me at that same age to read at a caf counter. And I thought, he counted on nobody in this family knowing how to fight on paper. He picked the wrong girl to underestimate. I made the copies. I did not sleep. And I was ready. Marcus filed his motion Monday at 9. We were waiting for him on the courthouse steps. It was raining, of course. It had rained the whole time since a September bus stop 11 years ago, and it rained now, coming down hard and cold, as Marcus climbed the steps under a black umbrella with his good coat and his even teeth, and stopped when he saw us, Daniel and me, and beside us the probate attorney, and beside her, in a wheelchair wrapped in blankets, having signed herself out against medical advice because she said she would be damned if she'd miss this. Colleen, you shouldn't be here, Marcus said to her. He almost sounded like he meant it. You should be resting. I've got the rest of my life to rest, Colleen said. Which isn't long. I'm not spending the front of it in a bed while you steal the back of it. Marcus's eyes went to the folder in the attorney's hands, and something flickered. He recovered fast. If that's the handwritten thing, he said. I told your friend how this goes. A medicated woman, an interested girl. It's witnessed by 2 people with nothing to gain, the attorney said. It's dated, it's in her hand, and her physician will attest she was lucid and unmedicated 8 weeks ago when she wrote it. As holographic codicils go, it's clean. We'll be entering it this morning, and we'll be moving to remove you as trustee for cause. For cause. Marcus smiled. There's no cause. I'm acting in the estate's best interest. You signed a purchase agreement with the Halstead Group 3 weeks ago, I said. The smile stopped. Before you ever came to the caf, I said. Before you sat at that counter and told us you were only just now considering it. reluctantly, for the family's good. You'd already signed, and you'd already written yourself a consulting fee, payable on close. It's in the agreement. I have it. It's dated. I took a step up toward him, and I wasn't shaking anymore. You didn't come to the Bluebird to weigh anything, Marcus. You came to run out the clock on a woman you thought was too sick and too alone to stop you. That's the cause. That's the self-dealing. It's on paper, in your own hand. I let it land. She wrote you out in her own hand. You wrote yourself out in yours. The rain filled the silence. Marcus looked at the folder, and at the attorney, and at Colleen small and fierce in her wheelchair, and last at me, and I watched the arithmetic happen behind his eyes. The calculation of a man who is always one discovering, in real time, the exact size of the thing he cannot win. This is unproven, he tried. This is the county filing office, the attorney said. The physician's affidavit and the codicil, all being entered within the hour. You're welcome to contest it. You'll be contesting it while under investigation for breach of fiduciary duty, which is what the copy in my associate's hand is being walked over to the disciplinary board about right now. She checked her watch. You have a bar license, Mr. Kessler. Or you did as of this morning. Marcus stood on the courthouse steps in the rain, and for one long moment the polish cracked all the way through, and underneath it was just a cold and ordinary man who'd gambled on nobody loving Colleen Voss enough to fight for her, and lost. He didn't say anything else. He turned and walked back down the steps, and got into his car, and he was gone. And it was the least dramatic thing in the world, which is exactly how those men leave when the documents come out, quietly, because paper doesn't care how good your teeth are. Colleen lived 11 more weeks, long enough to see the codicil entered and the trust corrected, and the Bluebird's doors stay open, long enough to teach me the cinnamon roll recipe properly, standing behind me with her hands over mine at the counter that raised me, both of us covered in flour, laughing. Long enough for the Bar Association to open its file on Marcus, and long enough that the last time his name came up she waved it away like a fly, because he had stopped being the story. He was never really the story. And long enough for one more thing. We got married in the CAF. Of course we did. On a gray afternoon in the rain, with the pie case pushed back and the regulars in their assigned stools and Estelle crying into a napkin. Daniel and I stood in front of the counter where we'd known each other for 11 years, and we finally said out loud the thing his mother had asked us about over a steaming casserole in a lifetime that felt like 100 years ago. Colleen sat in the front row in her chair, wrapped in blankets, thinner than I could stand to look at, her eyes brighter than the whole gray day. And right before we started, she caught my hand the way she had that first night, her flower-ghosted fingers closing over mine, and she leaned in, and she smiled, and she asked me one more time, soft now, just, for me, the fear finally gone out of it, and only the love left. Well, she whispered, when? I looked at Daniel. At 11 years. At a borrowed umbrella I never gave back. At the counter, the rain, the recipe, the whole long quiet love of it, finally allowed to be loud. I squeezed her hand. Now, I said. And she closed her eyes, and she let go of the thing she'd been carrying since a casserole and a diagnosis in a locked storeroom, and she breathed out, and she stayed for it. She stayed for all of it. And it was the only wedding gift I have ever needed. If you'd found that codicil taped to the bottom of a Bluebird recipe box, with the sale closing in 3 days, and a man like Marcus counting on your silence, would you have had the nerve to carry it up those courthouse steps in the rain and use it? And have you ever loved someone quietly for years, so sure they could never see you the way you saw them that you almost let the whole life go unspoken. Until the one moment you nearly lost them forced the words out at last? Who was it? Tell me about the one you almost never said it to. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, because the next one is about a promise made at a funeral that nobody was supposed to keep.